Forged on the gridiron in September. Perfected in the magic of March. For the fans who love the crunch of the pads. Prefer a dunk. And expect nothing but the best. This was the Big Ten. Now this is Bigger Ten. Here's Steve Dace.
And greetings. Welcome to another week of Bigger Ten here on the channel. Steve Dace with my co-host, never partner, Aaron McIntyre. By the time, Aaron, we play another round of games here in our conference, it's going to be the month of November. And as former Indiana coach Lee Corso has said for many years on College Game Day, and by the way, how cool was it to see Lee Corso go back to his old stomping grounds as Indiana University coach and wearing the same team sweatshirt he wore back in the day, 40, 50 years later. But it's the games in November that you always remember, and we are heading towards those kinds of games now. How you doing, brother?
Yeah, as much as College Game Day has changed, at least in recent years, I do appreciate how they do still try to make this an effort to not just be an SEC showcase every single week. They do try to make it as much of an all-inclusive college football pageantry, all-inclusive tradition as they possibly can. And seeing Corso in the old Indiana gear was super cool over the weekend. But
it was.
We are into...
They did a great video of that too. It was really poignant, really well done.
Yep. So we are into the crunch time of the season, and there's still, like we said, going into the season with the 12-team playoff, a lot of teams that still have a lot to play for. A lot of teams, even if they don't have anything to play for themselves, still have some opportunities, at least elsewhere around the college football landscape, to ruin somebody else's season. So it is going to be an entertaining month, to be sure.
Indeed, and we're getting into the time now where the field is winnowing to see who still has something to play for or not. And it'll be fascinating to see how some of these teams that are out of the playoff race, when in the past things like bowl positioning and stuff still really mattered, I'm not so sure that it does anymore, and it'll be fascinating to see if we see some of the upsets in November that we used to see in past years, Aaron. I don't know that we will. We may or may not. We don't know what the give-a-care factor is going to be for some of these teams. For example, my favorite team, Michigan. All right, they got a rivalry win last week. Yeah, they got number one Oregon coming to town, but all their season goals are pretty much off the table. I guess if you want to say if they won out and beat the number one team at Ohio State on the road, they might be in the conversation for the 11th or 12th seed, but the odds of that are 2%, right? And so what are some of the motivations your Iowa Hawkeyes right now sitting at 5-3? There's no West Division to go win, so that is going to be fascinating to see down the stretch here.
Yeah, this is. I mean, for a team like mine with Iowa, there's nothing left to play for. I would have said maybe if Nebraska was still humming along right now, but there's really no team that's on the rest of the schedule where it's like you can play spoiler, because I would think maybe that could be that could be a motivational factor. Although I'm not sure anymore if that actually is the truth. But around the rest of like in the Big 12, that's going to be a really fun conference to watch down the stretch. There are aspects of the Big 10 that'll be fun, but if you're a Michigan fan right now, a Michigan player, I don't know, but don't you think, hey, we could really kind of at least put a jolt into, not a jolt, but take some jolts out of Oregon right now this coming weekend if we can spring the massive upset. Like you said, we just don't know how much of a motivation some of these storylines will be. But if you're a team like Iowa where you're not ranked, you're not playing for anything, and you're not playing anybody who's playing for anything, it's a kind of a snooze fest.
One last thing on this front, that a team like USC is a great example of who we're talking about. So it's a pretty young team, but still very talented. And that game at the end of the year where they host Notre Dame, and that's one of the great rivalries in college football. And that's a rivalry that has been rife with upsets over the years. And that would typically be the kind of spot, if you're an Irish fan, you're like, crap, man. All right, we got this thing. We got the playoff in the bag, but we got to go on the road to L.A. Thanksgiving weekend. It would make their whole season to beat us, and they're going to just let it all hang out, And that was how we used to think. But if USC is like 6-5 going into that game, are there going to be some guys who are like
business decisions?
Yeah. I mean, I hope. I know I've been harping on this since the start of the season. I want to be wrong, man. I do. But to me, it's not much of it. The far bigger leap is is it Fortunate, the LSU running back?
Leonard Fournette.
Leonard Fournette. I'm sorry, I said Fortunate. Leonard Fournette went to Christian McCaffrey when they were the first two guys to skip bowl games. That was, to me, the bigger step than, well, if I'm not going to play in a bowl game that doesn't matter, why would I play in any game that doesn't matter? To me, that's not nearly as big of a step as the first step of skipping bowl games. So we shall see. All right, let's get to our Big Five on Bigger 10, although that could have been one of the topics right there. Let's start at the top. Ohio State survives. Although, man, their fans and media are sure acting like that was an L. Nebraska took another one-score loss. I don't even know what the record is anymore on these since 2016, Aaron. I just stopped counting. It's become a tradition unlike any other. Dylan Raiola overthrew at least two touchdowns that would have, at different junctures, that would have won them the game. I felt for Nebraska fans. They got Columbused by the officials on several plays in that game as well. And so I don't really know where either one of these two teams are right now.
Yeah, so if you're Nebraska, I think you have the answer to the question. If you're forced to lose, if you know you're going to lose, would you rather lose by a lot, or would you rather lose in a one-possession game where you looked at least competent at times against a really, really good opponent? And I think even Nebraska fans who have been party to one-score losses more than we can count, it seems like, more than the sand on the seashores, I think they would rather take looking somewhat competent at times against a really good, what we think is a really good team in Ohio State on the road in Columbus. I mean, I would definitely take that rather than getting your socks beat off 56-7 at Indiana. Not to take anything away from Indiana, but it would be anybody if you got beat 56-7. So I guess hats off to Nebraska. You know, they made it a game. They really did make it a game. And I'm not out on Ohio State yet. I know they expect to win every game against teams like Nebraska by a lot. You're going to have some clunkers every now and then. Oregon had a clunker to begin the season against Idaho. I would not tap out on Ohio State yet. I'm still very concerned, though, in the game after the one at Oregon. You still see some chinks in the armor on the line of scrimmage, particularly on the offensive side. That is still kind of a cause for concern. Now, when it comes to skill groups versus offensive linemen, I would still rather make adjustments in the season to the offensive line. I'd rather not have this problem at all, but I'd rather try to make some adjustments to the offensive line and coach them up mid-season than I would if it was a problem with quarterback or receivers. So I still think you're fine in that department. I still think, you're fine there. But I'm still concerned, especially after just getting kind of out-physicaled in a lot of elements against Oregon. You got out-physicaled, especially on the offensive line against Nebraska. And not taking anything away from Nebraska. They have a good defense. I'm still just concerned about that in terms of their overall prospects this season, overall goals this season, because the competition here coming down the home stretch is not going to get any lighter.
That's great analysis. And also great analysis. I want to make sure we give him credit for this. Tom Fornelli at CBS Sports had this stat this week. So you mentioned Ohio State's offensive line issues. Their outstanding left tackle out for the year. He got hurt a couple games ago. His backup, who was not playing well anyway, he got hurt against Nebraska too. And so what they're planning for Penn State this week is to take, I think it's Donovan Johnson, their All-American guard, and push him out to left tackle, which means that could be great, but you could also be creating now two weaknesses by moving the guard to tackle. If he can't do the job up against Penn State, who probably has the best edge rush team in our league, and then you have maybe an interior problem at guard too. But Fornelli had this stat. Since Ohio State lost its outstanding left tackle, Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson, now, these are two guys, if they were on different teams, could have All-American caliber seasons at running back, right? Okay. These two guys have run the ball 66 times. They've averaged 2.9 yards a carry.
Yeah. That's not going to get it. That's not going to get it done. Not in November, Not in the college football playoff, not in the Big Ten championship game. It's not going to get it done.
Well, that brings us to the other half of we've got Game of the Year 2 this week with Ohio State at Penn State. By the way, there's been a lot of comparisons this year with all the upsets and the unranked teams being top 10 teams to 2007. I think this is the most top 5 matchups we've had before November since that year in 2007 as well. And this is another one. So we talked about Ohio State coming off a bye, really an uninspiring performance against Nebraska. You could say look-ahead spot, but why would you have a look-ahead spot coming off a bye? Right? So Penn State, Also came off a bye, went on the road. They thrived even without Drew Aller.
Yes.
And had just the kind of no frills. We let you hang around for a while, then we put the pedal to the metal kind of game that, I with my Michigan teams the last few years, this is what great teams do in these kinds of environments. And that is exactly what Penn State did now as it prepares against the Buckeyes. And something's got to give here, Aaron. I mean, James Franklin is 1-9 combined against Ohio State and top 5 teams, 1-9. All right. Ryan Day is 2-6 against top 5 teams. Now, in fairness to Ryan Day, half of those losses are to maybe the greatest 3-year run Michigan football's ever had. Okay. And it's tough to beat top 5 teams, but you're also at Ohio State and Penn State. You're not making all that money to beat Purdue by 60. You're making all that money to win these games, right? So we have Ohio State with the shuffled offensive line. We have Penn State not knowing which quarterback will play. You have to believe as an Ohio kid, if Drew Aller can go, he will go. And they avoid the whiteout. Because of the Big Noon Saturday contract. So it's going to be a stripe out instead. So to me, I think Penn State coming back home after a nice solid win at Camp Randall and at prime time, they appear to have the momentum. But this is kind of a survival game for Ohio State, where if they lose here, they're not just out of the Big Ten race, but they no longer control their own destiny, even to make the college football playoff. They're going to need some help from some other. They're going to need an SEC team or two to lose a couple games right now. So there's a ton on the line for this game outside of the fact it's two of the biggest brands in our league.
Yeah, I'm the most optimistic for Penn State's prospects this season, as I have been all season, because of the environment that they played in. And I mean, Wisconsin did come to play. They had the lead, didn't they, at halftime or heading into halftime? Yeah. They really did come to play. They probably played their best effort right out the gate that I've seen from Wisconsin all season, given the opponent. And Penn State just handled them. And I'm not saying this to diminish Drew Aller or anything like that, but Bo Pribula came right in and he did himself just fine. I mean, I think he had like 30 yards of rushing, almost 100 yards passing. He did just fine. So that's really difficult because I harken back to 2021, a similar situation where Penn State went into Iowa. It was a top 5 matchup. And Sean Clifford went down at halftime, and they had a backup come in, and I can't remember his name, and it was just meltdown city across the. Not to bring back a sore memory for you, but it was like you remember the Michigan State game? Trouble with the snap. Every single play was trouble with the offensive line for Penn State. Yeah. And it was just a meltdown on the road in a difficult environment. They were on the road in a difficult environment and in prime time, as you pointed out there, and they didn't blink. They just didn't blink. That's a sign of, really good players, but really good coaching as well, especially when you consider the backup quarterback was in there. So I'm more optimistic about Penn State's prospects overall this season than I have been all season, because you go back to the Big Ten bus tour and it was just like, this looks like every single Penn State team we've seen. Well, yeah, they do, but they've also faced some real adversity too, going back to the Wisconsin game. So I don't know. I'm pretty optimistic about their chances on Saturday. I know they're Ohio State's favored by a field goal and the hook, but I'm pretty optimistic about Penn State's chances.
I mean, Penn State's top 10 in the nation right now in explosive play rate on offense. So that doesn't look like every Penn State team we've seen, under James Franklin for sure. Yep. Now, everybody, as we get to topic 3 here, Aaron, everybody's chasing number 1 Oregon right now. And after those 2 opening games against Idaho, which, we talked at the time, that's one of the most confounding box scores I've ever seen, where somehow Idaho could have taken the lead in the fourth quarter. They're getting dramatically outgained. There's not a bunch of turnovers. There's not a bunch of penalties. And then the next week, they struggle against Boise State, who may end up making the playoff, so there's no harm in that. But they have cranked it up steadily now, and they're just burying teams in the first quarter. They did it again to Illinois, who had already beaten 4 ranked teams this year, and they're up 21-0 here in the first quarter before people have had a chance to take a potty break there in the stadium yet. So they now make the cross-country trip. I want to say the numbers are 5-13-1, something like that. Teams that are making the 2 time zone trip. They didn't technically make a 2 time zone trip against Indiana because they went from Pacific. Well, no, because there would be Mountain and Central. So, yeah, that's still 2 time zone. All right. So they won that thing 35-0 on a Friday night. This is the biggest underdog, as I mentioned here on the channel yesterday on Michigan podcast. This is the biggest underdog Michigan has ever been in the history of the program since they've been publishing lines on games going back to the 1970s. And by more than a field goal. The biggest margin was 12.5 to Ohio State in 2017. And right now, Oregon's about a 15-point favorite in this game. So the Ducks are clearly the class. And if you look at the rest of their schedule, hard to see where the loss is coming from until at least Indianapolis anyway.
Yeah, I don't think anybody in the country wants to play Oregon at this juncture. And you're right. I expected a little bit more resistance out of Illinois, maybe something akin to when we saw them play Penn State. But Oregon just was all over them from the jump. And then in the second half, it's just like we're going to just do this stiff arm on you. We're just going to kind of shut it down, but you're not going to do anything either. That is when you're in complete and total control of a team in a game. And Illinois is not a bad team by any stretch of the imagination this year. So, yeah, Oregon has got it going right now. This is kind of what I expected to see out of the gate. Maybe that's an unfair expectation. This is what I expected to see from them out of the gate this year. But, again, this is Dan Lanning's hallmark. It's just like a really, really good talent coached really, really well. And I think that's what you're seeing. I mean, in terms of talent, they are. If you were power rating them, you've got them not well ahead, but markedly ahead of a team like Penn State right now. A little bit of ahead of a team like Ohio State, or maybe even behind Ohio State. But that's just a hallmark of Lanning's coaching. So I don't know how I could be more complimentary to them right now. And you look at the schedule, as you mentioned. There's really unless they completely just have a look ahead moment. I don't know, man. I thought they looked like they were stuck in mud against Purdue a couple of weeks ago, and they still handled Purdue easily. That kind of gives you an indication of how good they are.
Indeed. Let's have our weekly Indiana segment. It's just time. It's just time to admit this is a really good football team. And what has really impressed me is for a program that is not used to this kind of spotlight. I mean, they haven't been 8-0 since their last Rose Bowl team in 1967. All right. And they hosted Big Noon Saturday kickoff show 2 weeks ago. And you mentioned a little while ago, they went out there and just 50-burgered Nebraska. They host College Game Day on a Saturday for the first time ever. And we've seen teams wilt in that spotlight. Like, for example, a few years ago, when your Hawkeyes took on Iowa State for the first time they ever had game day there. And you could just see that the moment from the beginning, the moment was kind of too big for Iowa State. They just were not used to that as a program. And they come out and, they end up beating, it wasn't dominant, but it was a pretty solid win over Washington and with the backup quarterback there, Taven Jackson. So I just think at this point, man, it's just time to admit it's just a really good football team. Yeah,
and maybe the time to admit that was last week or the week before, but it's as good a time as any. I don't know. This game, though, against Michigan State this weekend, well, let's talk about Indiana's greatness for a little bit. Again, they kind of did what you predicted they would do with the trends about backup quarterbacks coming in, the team rallying around. Washington pushed them, but they had a response every single time. That is a really, really positive thing, a really positive sign for them. So it was another multiple score winning game for Indiana. So I don't really know how much better you could do against the schedule that they've been given to you. I don't know how much better pick any team in the country could do against that schedule than what Indiana has done. So there's that. This game feels, I don't want to call it trappy for me, but you're going on the road at Michigan State with a quarterback who can do some things. He is the duality of man quarterback, as I've called him, in Aiden Childs. I don't know. This one there's something that stinks about this one to me because now you're in your second game without Nathan Rourke. Something smells about this one. I think Indiana should be able to take care of business, but you've got Michigan State just smarting off of a game they think they should have won against your Wolverines. This one's I'm going to be really careful with this weekend.
I'll tell you this, both Indiana and Oregon have not played in a lot of real road environments this year. Oregon's only road games, Purdue, okay.
They showed up that night.
Oregon State.
Purdue did show up that
they
night.
Did. The team did, but they did, yeah. Yeah, Oregon State, you have to think the whole thing with you left us behind, maybe kind of an environment there. And then there's another one I'm missing that I can't remember, but none of those are going to be with the Big House will be on Saturday. Similarly, if you look at what what Indiana's played on the road. Nothing there like Michigan State. Now you have to wonder though. I'm just telling you, I don't mean this to be condescending, but Michigan State fans have a tendency to just check out on the season if they lose to us. And basketball is just around the corner too, So, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what the energy level will be. Like if Michigan State had beaten us, I mean, it would be bananas at Spartan Stadium Saturday night. But the fact that they didn't, and then basketball is starting, I don't know. We'll see. All right, one last thing. Let's talk about Rutgers. Ended up going 0 for October after that 4-0 start. And that 4-0 start, man, that included a nice road win at Virginia Tech.
Yeah.
But the running game has struggled. Yes. The running game, Kyle Monangai kind of been shut down most of the month of October. And, there was a lot of talk that, they could win 7, 8, maybe 9 games with this schedule. After going 0 for October, I start looking at the rest of their schedule. I mean, I don't see any games there that I'm like, that's an automatic win for Rutgers. I'm not. I mean, I think they could go from 4-0 to not being in a bowl game. My guess is they'll find a way to win a couple of these games, but I don't think it's a lock by any stretch.
Yeah, one of my most disappointing teams of the season, maybe the most disappointing team in the Big Ten as far as expectations, given the schedule that they had. It was like making up for years of being stuck in that division. But they've just been stymied at multiple levels, and I have to think on some level it's their quarterback. This was a quarterback that apparently Minnesota didn't want, and he has struggled at times. And just, again, this was a 3-time zone away game against USC, and they got throttled. They pretty much got throttled. So you can't hide your quarterback. I don't want to lay all the blame there, but I'm not really sure what the problem is with Rutgers because it seems like they're dysfunctional in a number of areas. So, again, I don't know how many times Rutgers is going to get a schedule as easy as this, but to me, it's probably one of the biggest, if not the biggest, disappointment of the Big Ten season so far. I
mean, I think if they do anything other than win out, even if they get to a bowl game, it's a missed opportunity because of that schedule. You're right. I agree. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to play Would You Rather. All right, let's play some Would You Rather here, Aaron. Would you rather be a depleted Ohio State offensive line trying to block that Penn State pass rush, or a depleted Michigan secondary trying to cover those Oregon wide receivers this weekend? What would you rather be?
I'd rather be Michigan secondary trying to cover those Oregon wide receivers, because if you're Michigan, it's like you've really got nothing to lose. Ohio State, every single snap, every single step is going to be scrutinized this weekend. And the same is true for Penn State because of what James Franklin has at stake. But I would still rather be Michigan's depleted secondary. I would rather be neither, which is what makes this a great prompt. But I would still rather be Michigan, just because anything good that you do, any shutdown that you make, that's going to be kind of a pleasant surprise, I would think. This one is for you. Would you rather bet Wisconsin +3 on the road or Illinois +3 at home this weekend? Wisconsin is at Iowa. Minnesota is at Illinois.
I mean, I am trying to figure out. Illinois has really owned Minnesota under PJ Fleck too, by the way. So I have no idea why Minnesota is favored on the road.
I don't know.
Max Brosmer makes no sense to me.
Max Brosmer is playing a lot better, it seems like, than he was earlier in the season, but I still don't know why this warrants being a road favorite. I agree.
I'm taking Illinois. And I really believe, I think I said this last week, Aaron, I think there's 4 really good teams that have potential for greatness. And then I think there's another 12 teams in our league that, depending on if it's home or away, and whether they're +1 or not, and the turnover margin, are all basically the same team. And I think Illinois and Minnesota are 2 of those teams.
Yep. All right, this one's for you.
Would you rather be Rutgers, Michigan State, Washington, USC, or Maryland? As in, which 4-4 team do you think has the best shot to finish strong? And then for the next 9 months of the first 9 months of next year is going to be the look out for these guys team. Which of those teams do you think has the best shot to be that one?
Man, it's kind of a tie between Michigan State and Washington, but I think I'm going to go with Washington. They've already gotten, quite a few reps for the heir apparent, and I can't remember his name, the heir apparent quarterback there. More than some of them have been in. We're down by a lot here, so we're going to bench Will Rogers for a while. But I I give the tie here to Jed Fish. I just really like him as a coach. He's already a lot more. I mean, given the roster turnover, I don't think this can be understated. They've been really competitive this year. They've been really competitive. I know that seems odd because they've lost a few games, but they've kept it close. Lost a few games by multiple scores, but they've kept it close against teams you would not expect and in situations you would not expect. So I'm going with Washington.
Okay.
Finally, for you, would you rather be Rutgers or Northwestern right now? We just got done talking about Rutgers being potentially one of the most disappointing teams in the Big Ten right now. Northwestern never really got off the ground this year. Rutgers with a slightly better record than Northwestern.
I'd rather be Northwestern. I still have that really cool little mini stadium by the lake, and we're building a Taj Mahal that's going to open here in the next year or two. And their expectations were low coming into the year. For Rutgers, this season's a missed opportunity. Even if they get to a bowl game at 6-6, 7-5, that's still a really good season for them. But it was set up. The table was set for them to do something even more this year. And going 0 for October is more disappointing than I think anything a Northwestern fan is feeling, for sure. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, this week's poll results and our feedback of the week next. All right, this week's X-Poll results. Who wins the latest Big Ten game of the year? 63% said Ohio State. 37% said Penn State, it looks like that's who you voted for. So make your case, brother. Floor is yours.
From what I've seen from Penn State, they've been more consistent in the trenches this year so far, and they are good. They again, going back to the Big Ten camp tour, they look like a lot of Penn State teams that we've seen. But that's not a bad thing. That's not overall a bad thing. And when you look at some of the offensive stats that they've had, it's not really the same Penn State, at least on that side of the ball. They've had more success there in opening things up. So I think football, at least Big Ten football still, you can try to get away from the old magic as much as you want to, but it all comes down to the trenches. And I just think Penn State has been more consistent there this year. And I think they'll give Ohio State as many problems as they've had all year, at least on the offensive line, all of that shuffling around that they're doing. So that's why I'm going with Penn State this weekend. Okay.
That brings us to our feedback of the week. I just like this meme. Accusing me of being a racist. Why? I just like the meme a lot. Why? I don't know how you guys do it, man, but I don't know of another program in this sport that can find more fast white guys than the University of Iowa has. I mean, I can count off the top of my head at least. Yeah. I mean, I can count at least 5 white guys, starting with Tim Dwight, that have returned punts. First of all, it's hard as hell to return a punt for a touchdown in college and pro football. All right. I mean, it's one of the hardest things to try to accomplish. And I can think of at least 5 white guys at the University of Iowa that have managed to complete this feat. How do you guys do this? Where do you find these fast white guys at?
Usually at schools that are an acronym of like 5 different towns, 5 different like 1,000 people strong towns. That's where we find them, apparently.
I mean, you hear about them growing the big brawny kids out there on the farm, right? But these kids can run, man. These kids can run. So we did it again, and I wanted to make sure we noted our racist take. All right, that'll do it for this week's episode of Bigger 10. Don't forget to like, rate, subscribe, share, 5-star review, however that applies to you, whether you're watching right here on YouTube or listening on iTunes. We really appreciate all of that. Keep the comments going as well. All of that helps us to make the proper sacrifices to the algorithmic gods so that it will help us continue to find more Big Ten sports fans just like you. You can also follow us in between episodes at Bigger 10 on X as well, at Bigger 10 there. Until the next time, for Aaron McIntyre, I'm Steve Dace. We'll see you next week right here on Bigger 10.